Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tax Talk, broadcast by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My name is Jordan Bateman, and I'm the British Columbia Director of the CTF, and joined, as always, by our great Alberta Director, the greatest province in Confederation. That's at least what Alberta thinks. Paige MacPherson. Paige, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And I would contest that BC thinks the same thing, and there's a kind of little rivalry situation going.
Well, in BC, we know we're the best in Confederation.
Okay.
You guys just think it. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I want to thank everyone here for joining us for Tax Talk. Paige and I are hoping to be joined today by an old friend of the CTF's, Colin Craig. For several years, Colin was our Prairie Director. He now serves as the Director of Strategic Communications with the Manning Centre in Calgary. He's also the author of the impeccably titled The Government Wears Prada. Awesome. So we're hoping Colin works through some tech issues here and joins us shortly.
Jordan, I'm not able to accept him. Just
you're not? Oh, okay. Well, let me see.
An issue of my own.
I will try. Anyways, we're going to talk about several things today. Some union laws, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau's brave struggle for more staffing. We're going to talk about all of that, but lots of ways for people to stay connected to us. If you've joined us here live, you can make sure to subscribe to our feed to keep track of all of our shows. You can comment in the sidebar. You can tweet us at Jordan Bateman or at Paige McP. And you can also visit taxpayer.com to see what we're all working on. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization dedicated to three things: lower taxes, less waste, and more government accountability. So it drives all the communications, research, and advocacy work we do. If you're listening to this later as a podcast or recording, please feel free to email us, bc.director@taxpayer.com. And also check out our Facebook page. It's booming with videos, stories, comments, and all sorts of good debate going on there. Taxpayer or facebook.com/taxpayer.com. All right. Paige, what's new with you?
Well, I feel like a broken record because I swear this was my what's new just a couple weeks ago, but Alberta has had its credit downgraded again. So this time we've had our credit downgraded for the second time in 5 months by Standard & Poor's. And so okay, so the three major bond rating agencies have all downgraded Alberta's credit now. So we lost our AAA credit rating. We are no longer the top dog in Canada. You guys have a AAA credit rating out there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the rivalry continues. But so we've lost this prestigious status, and but now Standard & Poor's has actually downgraded Alberta's credit rating for a second time. So that AA plus, we're now just AA. So it's just a mess, and I just feel like we're on this really quick tumbling decline when it comes to our credit rating in Alberta. And one of these days, those borrowing costs are going to start going up and we're going to really start paying the price.
Yeah, I mean, credit ratings are like whirlpools, right? Once a spin starts, it's so hard to reverse it. Yeah. And I think that's where Alberta's at. Colin, what do you think? Credit down ratings in Alberta?
Not good. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I have a jinx with technology, and anyone who talks to my wife, she'll verify it. Okay. I like technology. Generally speaking, it does not like me. So my apologies that things were not working there. But yeah, it's pretty appalling what's going on in Alberta. Of course, I've seen this movie before. I lived in Manitoba under the NDP, and it's like that old joke about socialism. The only problem is that eventually you run out of other people's money, and that's the problem with these types of governments: is they spend so much money, then they get into these financial troubles, and things just spiral out of control, like Jordan said.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I think, I give Mike DeYoung in BC a lot of grief on various issues. And by no means are the BC Liberals perfect, but their commitment to trying to keep that credit rating as solid as possible. I mean, it does save hundreds of millions of dollars over periods of time. Governments borrow too much money. We'd like to see them stop. But, at the very least, if they are borrowing money, the lower interest rate we're paying, the better. This is just going to keep compounding in Alberta.
Yeah, well, and the cause, I mean, it's so identifiable. It's, we heard every single time that it's about our unsustainable debt load, our fact that we have no credible plan to pay down this debt, and the fact that our deficit is just on this upward trajectory with, it's kind of like a train without brakes. So it's, the problem is so clearly identified, and now we're getting calls, oh, this means that we need to raise taxes. And then there's this big elephant in the room that's, we have so much higher program spending, so much higher government employee compensation than every other province in Canada. If people who are calling for these tax hikes say, oh, we need to normalize with the rest of Canada, we need to have high taxes like the rest of Canada, completely ignoring the spending side. And I think that, government really needs to make a clear case to taxpayers as to why their taxes need to be raised. As in, we've tried everything on our side. There is no more fat to trim. And now we need to ask for you guys, not ask, force you guys to help us out. And that case has so very clearly not been made in this province.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. They want to normalize on the revenue side, but not on the expenditure side. And, like I said, living in Manitoba for years and years and years, what we would always hear was that even in Manitoba, they were getting annoyed with Alberta for paying their employees so much, because then all the unions in Manitoba would say, well, we got to stay competitive with Alberta. The problem is that Alberta was paying levels that weren't sustainable, clearly, because now that oil has dropped in price, they can't afford these contracts anymore. So they really created a mess, not just for themselves, but in other provinces too. And that's the big elephant in the room, is that the government's got to take on the unions and say, look, Joe, private sector employees getting a 10% cut, a 20% cut, they're losing their jobs. The public sector has to feel the pain a bit too. And there's a fairly easy way to do this right now, and that is through attrition. You've got mass retirements happening now and in the next few years. So when those positions are replaced, pay people less, pay them at lower levels, so that some of these people that are making a lot here, they might not have to feel the pinch as much. But then when these new people get hired, they're not even going to notice, because they weren't making those astronomical amounts before. So
yeah,
or don't rehire if the position's not necessary.
Right.
When somebody retires, don't rehire.
No, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, Colin, what's new? What's new with you?
Well, you want to start about that labor report now, or you want to wait and talk about some other stuff, or what's your...
Well, yeah, we can talk about the labor report a little bit later, but any articles, op-eds, news facts catch your eye this week? Any elbows to the piece that you want?
Well, I think the big elbow in Ottawa is certainly interesting to watch. I don't know what your take on it is. My own is that I think people are exaggerating a little bit in terms of, saying this is an offense to women and there's been a massive assault, all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of inflammatory language about it. I think it was certainly inappropriate what he did, but more than anything, I think when you look at his demeanor, the Prime Minister's demeanor, when he walked over to grab another party's member of Parliament and try and drag them to their seat, I think that speaks of arrogance more than anything myself. But of course, people will use all kinds of inflammatory language to suggest that, he's done something over.
Colin, can you imagine if Harper had done that? I mean, it would have broken the internet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's the funny thing, too, is that there's a whole bunch of people trying to jump on the grenade of the situation to defend the Prime Minister. And, in some cases, I think people are right to kind of downplay some of the inflammatory language. But at the same time, what he did is pretty ridiculous, and it shows kind of insight into his mindset, right? That he just thinks he can strut around the House of Commons like a peacock and push people around. Yeah. It's pretty appalling, but yeah. I
don't get the anger, like his anger in this. I mean, like, let's take a step back and think about this. You've just won this majority, a majority no one expected. There is no doubt that every single member of the Conservative NDP caucus would trade anything to be on that side of the House where you are. Yeah. I mean, it should be like Christmas every day for this guy. It doesn't matter what Rona Ambrose or any of these people say on the other side. You're the Prime Minister. You've got the power, and in Canada, you've got all the power.
Yeah.
Say whatever you want. It's Merry Christmas to me. You'd give anything to be here, but you're not. I mean, like that to me seems like the more natural response. This anger and grabbing Gordon Brown and like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it just. I don't know, people on Twitter have been commenting that, here he wasn't getting his way and he threw a little hissy fit. And I think that's a pretty good description of what happened. And if you step back, just not quite as far as what you're doing, Jordan, but just look at, well, what was he annoyed about in that situation? And that was that his government was trying to change the rules so that they would have more power in the House of Commons to shut down debate and move things along as they wanted. And the opposition was doing their role to, presumably try and have more debate on issues. And he didn't like that. So he threw a little hissy fit. He was trying to get this member of parliament moving along so that they could get talking. So, I think you're right. I mean, he needs to kind of cool his jets and understand that, yes, he has a majority, but he's still in a democracy and he has to let, debate happen.
Yeah, and part of it, so a lot of the commenting that's happening on social media about this is, well, he's the boss, he's the leader, like it's his job to get people in line, and that is not the Prime Minister's job. You can't just go over and drag people to their seats. That's not, we have a speaker, we have these institutions in place. That is not Justin Trudeau's job.
Yeah.
Part of it to me, I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. And I often look upon these situations and just sort of shake my head and think like, people make the biggest deals out of things and it's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But I find that, our Prime Minister he feeds into that ridiculous rhetoric a lot of the time. And he did this, with the Conservatives, when the Conservatives were in power and even now. And so now he's sort of a victim of this, hyper blown over ridiculous rhetoric about how he's no longer a feminist anymore because he asked. And so I'm kind of like, well, I don't have strong opinions on it. I almost just sit back and look and say, like, if you're going to feed into this environment that you helped create and then you become the victim of that environment, it's, you almost have to laugh and shake your head.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. He's this is not an isolated incident on its own. This is part of a pattern of behavior with him. In which he comments more, or he focuses more on stunts and selfies than he does substantive matters, right? I mean, he's doing these one-handed push-up things, or what people claim is a one-handed push-up. He used two hands, I'll note that. But, those types of things.
That's a hot fact check there from Colin Craig.
This is what he's getting.
On the record, I just want to clear things up.
Well, it kind of annoyed me because people were saying he's doing a one-handed push-up. No, he did a two-handed push-up, and then he took one hand away, which a lot of people can do. But anyway, he does all these stunts, and this one backfired on him, and now people are trying to help him out, and it's ridiculous. I'd like to see him spend more time talking about and working on issues that could really help this country, whether it's reforming EI or getting a pipeline built so that more money stays in this country and jobs are created by the private sector. Those types of things. That's what he should want to be known for, not the guy that was constantly doing these stunts and posing in Vogue magazine and all these other ridiculous things. It doesn't really help the average Canadian.
Jerry Butts is going to install a seatbelt in his House of Commons seats so that Prime Minister can't go into the aisle.
You guys can't tell me that you never just drop a casual plank in an important meeting, right? I mean,
yeah.
Happens to the best of us.
Well known for that. Well, my what's new, Colin, you'll appreciate this, having done many of these. It was Gas Tax Honesty Day yesterday for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And Colin, for the first time ever, we had a Quebec event. Carl Vallée, our new Quebec director in Montreal, where I'm happy to report for BC taxpayers, Montreal now has the highest gas taxes on the continent, pipping the British Columbians at the post.
Did you give them like a championship belt that someone can wear around?
Well, what I did is, the funny thing is we had done graphics, the big boards, and I'd done one that said, BC, Lower Mainland worst gas taxes in the country. And then there was a price spike in Montreal, and the HST there took them just above us. So I think they're about 49 cents a liter. We're 48. I was kind of, in trouble. I, had these boards. What am I going to do? So I went out, Colin. I bought the world's tiniest trophy, and then a little second place ribbon, and congratulations, taxpayers. We're number 2, as if this was some great accomplishment. And then, proceeded to rip the whole idea. Anyways, that look, 48 cents a liter. You put 40 liters of gas in your car. Do the math. Was that 16, $20 or? Right. Anyways, it's too much money. And Gas Tax Honesty Day is something we've been doing. I think this is our 18th annual Gas Tax Honesty Day. It's something we do every year because, you get your gas receipt at the bottom. You have the GST or the HST, depending on where you live. You think that's all the taxes you're paying on gasoline. It's not. You're paying quite a bit every year, hundreds of dollars every year in hidden gas taxes. So we keep going.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty. So in Alberta, this is a warning to other provinces who are thinking about carbon taxes. In Alberta, from 2014 to 2018, in 4 years, the cost for the average family of four, their gas bill, in terms of just the tax they pay, is doubling, more than doubling in just 4 years. So by 2018, the amount of gas tax that the average family of four will pay in Alberta is $888.
Wow.
And that's just the average. So that's not, not people who need to do a lot of driving, who live in rural communities and stuff like that. It's pretty crazy. And that's because, it's the PCs did hike gas taxes right before they lost the election, but they also, but the NDP, of course, is bringing in the carbon tax. So it has a really big impact. And that's just one of the ways the carbon tax makes life more expensive. And then obviously that's the case in BC too. That's one of the reasons why you were the crowning champion of most expensive gas in North America for a while.
I still think you need a championship belt to go from province to province.
Yeah, well, if it does, I think Newfoundland will take over next year because they're bringing a massive gas tax increase.
Oh, wow.
They may, if I remember correctly, they'll be up around 55 cents a liter. I mean, ridiculous for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. So hard to believe that people along the border are actually going to Quebec to fill up. But there you go.
And that's an area where you have to do a lot of driving, right? There's not a lot of bustling metropolises.
Yeah, there's no choice there for sure. Paige, why don't you take us through the union stuff with Colin?
Yeah, well, so Colin, I'm hoping that you can share a little bit more about this with us because, so this is interesting. I saw that the Manning Center released a report showing that a federal government plan to get rid of the union secret ballot in workplaces covered under federal labor legislation would actually would hurt workers, essentially, would have a negative impact on unionized workers. And this is something I actually hadn't been following that closely at the federal level to know that the feds were even considering this. So do you want to maybe start there and just take us through what is the federal government reviewing in the first place?
Yeah, so the big picture problem with what they're doing with labor legislation is that it could mean that some workplaces where workers don't really want to be unionized may actually become unionized. It has to do with the process that through which workplaces can become unionized. So generally speaking in Canada, there's two types of ways that a workplace can be unionized. The first involves a union going to the workplace and collecting enough signatures from employees to force a vote so that those employees can then vote on whether or not they'd like to unionize. So it's not always a case that those employees are signing things indicating that they're supportive of joining a union. The union just has to go in and collect the signatures on signed cards. And there's some issues that happen there, but that's the one approach. The second approach is that some jurisdictions, not a majority in Canada, but some in Canada, have an automatic union certification. So the union goes around, collects enough signatures, and then a union is automatically certified. So in BC, you have to collect 45% of employees' signatures in the workplace to force a vote. In Manitoba, the threshold is 40, but if you get 65%, then a union becomes automatically certified. And the Manitoba's incoming government is changing that. They're going to get rid of that automatic certification so that a worker always has the right to a vote. And so what Justin Trudeau is doing is the opposite, is that he has promised to bring an automatic certification if you get a majority, so 50% plus one, you would automatically have a union certified. And so there's some really interesting numbers that I dug up, and I first kind of heard about this a few years ago where unions will often claim high percentages to force the vote, but when the vote actually happens, a much lower percentage of workers actually vote in favor. So Newfoundland previously had this system where if you got 65% to sign, you would automatically get a union certified. And so in one case, a union got 64.4. So they came right up to that threshold. They almost got automatic certification. They didn't get it. And so it went to a vote. And guess how many people actually voted in favor of the union when it actually went to a vote?
Tell us.
Yeah, I know.
I know you're on the interview.
51%.
It was about 17%.
Wow.
So it went from 64 that they claimed were supportive of joining the union down to 17%. And so the big concern about having to openly sign cards that you're in favor of joining a union is that it can subject that person to intimidation, threats, all kinds of other types of problems. So that's why a secret ballot vote is preferred, and that's why we use them in elections and so forth, is that it creates a situation where that one single person is the only one that knows how they actually voted. And of course, that's the way it should be. And so the report that we put out, it's just a small policy brief, it's about 7 pages long, is I got data from 5 provinces where I looked at those votes, the percentage that claimed that the union claimed support of the union versus how many actually voted. And there are lots of cases where percentages dropped substantially. In one case in Alberta, the union claimed they had support. When it came time to actually vote, 0% of employees actually voted. So not a single employee voted in favor of joining the union. So you can understand why if you're organizing a union, you don't like the secret ballot, because it means that, if you're engaging in activities to intimidate someone and so forth, suddenly that's taken away from you, because, you'd have all these unions getting certified when in fact workers don't really want to do it.
Wow,
that's amazing.
0 to 100.
That's
as clear cut as it could possibly get.
Yeah. And there were actually lots of cases where we found it went from some particular percentage down to 0.
Wow.
Once employees could vote.
That's insane. So why are the Liberals doing this? Like the federal Liberals, what's the motivation here? Is it just purely political? Like what do you think that this is?
Yeah, my guess is that it's political payback. I mean, the unions they went hard after Harper because Harper brought this in. He brought in the secret ballot vote, and they don't like it. And Trudeau played nice with the unions during the election. I mean, you look at what he did for the federal government employees union. The moment he got in, he said, we're not going to go after cutting down their sick time abuse. So federal employees were taking tons of sick time compared to everyone else. And the former government said, look, we're going to start to bring that expenditure area down. And the union didn't like that, of course. So Trudeau said, hey, wait, we're not going to do that. So he's been doing all kinds of things in favor of unions. And I think this is just the latest way to pay them back.
So in your report, you find a lot of, these numbers showing that what maybe the union will say is not actually accurate of how workers are feeling. Is there any other findings, or is that the sort of the major crux of the report?
Yeah, so I've got that data for BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick, so people can kind of see those examples. I did ask for a number of other jurisdictions. I wasn't able to get the data. In some cases, I only got part of the data, but you could still see this pattern where this type of situation happens. So a majority of time, the union will actually see an increase in support, and I think that's to be expected, because if a union's going to go to a labor board and say, hey, we want to unionize this workplace, you can darn well bet that they're going to expect to win that vote. So I've got the data for all 5 of those provinces. I've got some interesting anecdotes in there too. So in an example of a letter to the editor in the Winnipeg Free Press, someone wrote in talking about this issue. They said, yeah, they like the idea of a secret ballot vote because their workplace was approached by a union to organize, and this person actually had 2 what he described as burly men come to his house. So you can understand how that would be intimidating if you're not a big person. Maybe if you're new to the country and English isn't your first language, or whatever the case may be, and these 2 burly men show up at your door encouraging you to sign a card. You don't really understand what you're doing, or you're intimidated, you might do it. So, I mentioned that in the report, and also some information from a large union called LAUNA, the Labor International Union of North America. I think that's what it stands for. I've got it mentioned in the report, but they even note on their website that unions will do these dirty tricks during signing processes to try and lure members. So, the unions acknowledge that it happens. Certainly there's enough people in Canada who have experienced these intimidation examples. That's a good reason why the secret ballot vote should be in place. And I'm not saying that every union's engaging in these activities, but for those that are, if you'd have the secret ballot vote in place, you take away their power to intimidate people.
Well, it just seems so central to democracy, right? In general, having a secret ballot, it's just, we do it in elections. It should be the same, especially when you're talking about, large swaths of the population that the result would be essentially being forced to be in a union, whether or not they want it. And we are, of course, paying their salaries often, which in turn goes to those union dues. So, it just seems so central to having that that secret ballot in place. Well, that's a interesting finding. So when do you have any idea of the timeline of this? Do you know when we're going to find out from the federal government, their findings on their end or of their review?
Well, they're actually debating the legislation right now, and I think they're getting close to either sending it to the Senate or voting on it. So I would expect that the government's going to try and pass this bill pretty soon, unless maybe elbows get up and legislation gets delayed. I don't know. You never know what's going to happen there in Ottawa. But I think that if enough people did speak out on this, that that you could have the government back down. But it'll certainly be an uphill battle. But I think at the very least, people need to understand that this is what's going on.
Yeah.
The previous government, you always hear these cries that they're anti-democratic and so forth, but you look at these two examples, the getting rid of the secret ballot when it comes to people voting, and then also with the the electoral reform that they want to proceed with, they don't want to do a referendum there either, right? So I think that they're getting off to a wrong foot if they're trying to pretend to be the government that's more democratic than the previous one.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I posted a link here on the bottom right-hand corner for people if they want to see the report, but you can go to Manning Center DA to see that report. We wanted to talk about topics while we had you, and one is, I guess, the role of the quote-unquote First Lady in Canada. I listened to Canada Land with Jesse Brown, which is an interesting podcast, and Jesse is interesting because he's, not really I don't think philosophically aligned with the CTF on anything, except he does not like corporate welfare. He does not like handouts. He doesn't like anything like that. I always enjoy that. But, he was like, oh, she's the First Lady. Give her some money, which I think is completely, we're different than America. It amazes me how, we don't want to be like America in any way. But, an American First Lady, absolutely. Let's get on board with that. So, am I just wrong? Like, First Ladies have no official role, and I think we already staffed them up a little bit anyways. Why should we give more?
Well, I don't think she should get any additional support. Like you said, she already had one staffer to help her out with responding to requests and that. I don't think the average Canadian would really have a huge problem with that, because they could understand how if you're married to the Prime Minister, you're going to get requests to come out to events and that too. But to on top of that, ask for more staff to help with that. And we have to remember too that she's also got these two nannies. She's got two nannies there that are helping to take care of her kids at the expense of the taxpayers, and then she's got a chef on top of it. So I think we really need to stand back and say, well, wait a second here. Who was elected here? Was it Mr. and Mrs. Trudeau, or was it Mr. Trudeau? And obviously the answer is Mr. Trudeau. She doesn't have any official duties. But the other thing that I think really hasn't been talked about too much is that there's already someone that is employed by the taxpayers of Canada to do a lot of this work that Justin Trudeau's wife is claiming that she needs to do, and that is the Governor General. His job is to handle these ceremonial duties, to speak at these charity functions and so forth, and entertain dignitaries and all that stuff. That's his job. He's paid for it, and he has his own fleet of staff. So why are we continuing to expand the size of government and the number of people that have all these ceremonial official duties? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. It's just another sort of unelected, unaccountable position that would be, using tax dollars. And what bothers me too, and this is so Canadian. I mean, I find that the words charity and volunteer get thrown around in Canada so often. What bothers me is that it's being presented as though, oh, she has so much charitable work she needs to do, so much volunteer work that she needs to do. I'm like, guys, do you know the definitions of charity and volunteer? Because neither of them involve getting paid to do it. Neither of them involve having a staff to help you do it. If you're doing something that's charitable, then you take your own time, you take your own money, and you engage in doing that. And it's the same for volunteer work. So I'm not sold on this whole, she needs to do more charity work, she needs to do more volunteer work, and therefore she needs more taxpayer funded staff. Like, if you'd like to undertake those activities, good on you. That makes you, a wonderful person. Use your role for good, for sure. Why taxpayers should need to expand the staff in order to have that happen, that case is not clear to me.
I agree. I also like some of Justin Trudeau's words on government policy, and that is using evidence-based decision-making. So, she's made this claim that she's got all these requests. Well, where's the data? Where's the data showing how many that previous prime ministers received or their spouses received in terms of requests versus how many she's receiving?
Yeah.
Because presumably, if he wants to proceed with this evidence-based decision-making process, that would have been his first question. Well, what's your justification for asking for more staff? How many requests are you getting versus the previous spouse? And obviously, I don't think that's been happening. But yeah, overall, I think it's just a case of governments being government and politicians being politicians, wanting to blow money in ways that the average Joe probably doesn't agree with.
Well, there's a future thing here too, where if we go to this U.S. model of a first lady or first gentleman, you're actually boxing in future spouses of the prime minister, right? And what happens if a prime minister is elected and her husband is a neurosurgeon? Is he going to have to quit his practice in order to go into the ceremonial role and whatnot, or prime minister is elected and his wife is a pediatrician, you're really boxing in future spouses. And this is a big problem where in the States now, can you imagine a first lady or first gentleman, if Mrs. Clinton's elected, can you imagine them, holding on to their real day job and trying to do all this? I don't want to go down this path. I want to give a little bit of flexibility to the spouses of prime ministers in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, and I think we need to talk about the irony here too. The irony of running on a platform of relating to the middle class and understanding of the middle class and obviously coming from quite a privileged background themselves. And, fine, you don't begrudge somebody for that, but this is not at all relatable to what middle class people go through. I mean, the idea that part of the argument here is, I have children and I have my husband that I have to juggle. Yeah, so does every other, working mother in Canada. And yes, obviously her spouse is facing exceptional demands and has an exceptional workload and an exceptional job. Of course, there's no question about that. But needing more staff to be able to juggle the children and juggle the marriage and supporting her spouse, that's something that, everybody faces if they're a working parent. And so I don't think that, there's some real irony there in sort of running on this middle class platform and then just being completely out of touch, completely unrelatable on this. And of course, having, those other working parents be the ones who have to pay for it.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I won't defend them at all. I think the other thing too is that this is a family that wasn't naive about what's involved in politics. I mean, obviously Justin Trudeau's dad was a prime minister. They knew the workloads and so forth. They decided to get into this game with a young family, and they knew what the challenges would be. Why they would expect the taxpayers to fund nannies for their kids and extra staff for Mrs. Trudeau. I think it speaks of arrogance. Even just the idea that, having a young family and deciding to do this, I can't understand why he would want to be so busy during his kids, youngest years, but, he's made that decision. Overall, I just think that, it shouldn't be up to the taxpayers to fund their problems, especially given how much money we're paying him as prime minister. $300,000+ to a guy that, what was his most successful job before this?
Easy. I read his book.
Yeah.
Colin, while we have you, I want to talk about one other thing, and that's the First Nations Financial Transparency Act. Obviously, you were instrumental in working with the grassroots Aboriginal people from across the country in getting this act passed. We've seen the second year of data now. I can tell you of the 200 or so BC First Nations, only 3 have yet to file that second round of data. But, the Liberals have decided they're not going to enforce the act anymore, and essentially it's becoming voluntary. I think for people like you and me who worked a lot on this is a grave disappointment. But my disappointment pales in comparison to, some of these grassroots First Nations folks who I talk to here in BC who are very upset that they can't see what their chief is being paid anymore. So, where do we go from here on this? And how do we convince these Liberals of the value of this legislation?
I think it's going to take a lot of people to speak out, because that's what happened the first time. The First Nations Financial Transparency Act the first iteration of it was a private members bill by Kelly Block from Saskatchewan. And that bill was actually supported by, I think it was about 17 Liberal members of Parliament. And they broke ranks with the rest of their party because they could see, I think, probably one, that it was common sense, but two, that that's what their constituents actually wanted to see happen. So I think if there's enough public pressure, then the Liberals will back down. Can you muster up that amount of public pressure again? I don't know. But that's, I think, what it would take to happen. By making it voluntary, we'll end up with, where we were 5 years ago. And that is that the good chiefs and councils that are already transparent and they're open and they're accountable, they won't have a problem showing this information to their communities because they've been doing it for years, and that's just how they operate. It's the cases where the chiefs and councils outright lie to their own people and abuse their power and authority, and they hide the information, and they're, in many cases corrupt. They're not going to give the information out. And that was the problem we were in, 5 years ago, was that, so many band members were telling us that they were asking for this information and they couldn't get it. And, that's why we made the push many moons ago. But, sadly, that's probably where we're going to end up once again. And the previous rules actually required the bands to disclose the information, but they just weren't abiding by those rules. So that's when the federal government actually put it forward in legislation.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's one of the big disappointments because that was such a key victory. I think of families here who are trying to get information about what the Squamish First Nation pays their chief and staff, especially from some of these business interests that they now have. Squamish First Nation is a partner in one of the biggest land deals in British Columbia history, which if you're following property prices in British Columbia, it's hard to be the biggest deal, one of the biggest deals anymore, because every deal seems to be big. But yeah, we're going to have to keep fighting and getting the grassroots together and just trying to help them become the voice there, I guess.
Yeah, it's especially disappointing for the people. We don't live on reserves, but some of them they're quite difficult places to live, especially if you want to be someone who's speaking out for accountability. And that there are lots of sad cases that I heard of people being threatened and abused. And one guy got a death threat that he told me about. And that's where it's really going to be hard for people who are in those communities where they were depending on that legislation to help them understand where money was going and to hold their leaders accountable. So it's really difficult when you think about it from the grassroots perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Colin, thank you. Colin wrote a great book called The Government Wears Prada. It might be the greatest title in the history of books in our movement. I love that.
Awesome. And a really good book.
Yeah, it's a great book. You can buy it on Amazon.ca. Colin, if I recall, you talked First Nations financial transparency, I believe, in the book as well. Do we?
Yeah, I share a little bit of information on there. It's an example of an advocacy victory, one of the few that I've shared. So.
Exactly, and lots on labor.
Can I speak also to the fact that Colin's book it's really good on the solutions side, using it brings up a lot of real world examples of we often talk about, this is a waste in government and how can they be spending this much money and it's almost incomprehensible. But Colin gives a lot of solutions in his book as, let's do this instead. Different models of government programs, different models of how things can work that are less expensive. And so if you're somebody who's looking for not only some ridiculous examples of government waste, that'll just make
a few in there.
But also sort of some good examples on the solution side of how we can do things better, then this is a really good book for you. One of, I would say, the best that I've read on that solution side as well.
Well, thank you.
Oh, look at this high praise for Colin here. So he's going to come on the show all the time now.
We can do this for another hour, Kevin.
Keep going, Paige. Well, speaking of waste, let's do our waste of the week. So this one is, British Columbia, we don't have a monopoly on stupid government projects, but at times I feel like we should trademark the term. So 5 years ago or so, the Metro Vancouver Regional District opened a conference center called the Anasis Center, and it's in the middle of an industrial park, and it's attached to the local sewage treatment facility, the Anasis Island Treatment Facility. And the idea was you had this beautiful conference center, and they actually piped sewage under the parking lot to this new center, and the idea was that there would be all sorts of experiments going on in a back room. They could do scientific experiments on our sewage. It turns out hardly ever used. Shockingly, I know this is going to shock you too, not a big market for conferences, conventions, and weddings to be across from the local sewage treatment plant. So they spent $9 million to build this thing. It's 18,000 square feet. It's located across the street from the Acid Sewage Treatment Station. It loses $400,000 a year in operating costs. So, that was 5 years ago they built it. 2 years ago, they decided we've got to do something. We've got to get more conferences in. So they launch a branding, a marketing program. Come and do your events here. It results in like a half dozen or so private meetings, mainly from other industrial companies there who need a place for their people to meet. I think it had one wedding, and gosh, would I love to meet that couple to see what kind of deal they got. But that goes on for a few years, $400,000. 2015, we nominate for a Teddy Waste Award. And to be honest, I hadn't really thought about it for a couple of years since that Teddy Waste Award. And then lo and behold, CBC reports that Metro Vancouver is going to spend $20 million to improve the smell coming from that waste, that sewage treatment center. $20 million. Now, the story is great because it's like, you can smell this all across Delta. This has been a huge problem. People who go on a bridge over top of, holding their nose for years. And you're like, guys, you built a convention center right at ground zero of the smell radius. Like, you knew this was a problem for years, and you built a $9 million conference center there. So $20 million more to improve the smell of the sewage treatment center. I guess that will be our waste of the week.
Just imagine if they had taken that $9 million and put it towards addressing the smell. Yeah,
well, exactly.
That probably could have done a lot of good.
Yeah. It's going to get rid of apparently 95% of the smell. So, but a rose by any other name, by any other percentage, smells just as sweet.
I've got one question for you on that. Do they have like an aquarium in there?
No. It's a beautiful building.
It
would look great in Whistler. Like, it's a gorgeous building, but the first thing you know is when you park there, it's like, what's that smell? Oh, it's the sewage treatment center, which is literally a couple hundred feet away. It's mind-boggling. Who thought this was a good idea? Anyways, there you go. That's it for this episode of Tax Talk from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Be sure to follow Paige on Twitter at Paige MacP. Follow Colin. Easy for me to say, at Colin Craig 1. Or follow me at Jordan Bateman. If you're watching this on Blab or on iTunes, feel free to subscribe to our feed. Give us good ratings because, we're needy people. Colin, do you know we're like the number 14 rated podcast in the iTunes government and organization store? I don't want to brag.
Pretty big deal.
Oh, nice.
Big time.
Congratulations.
Every day we pray that Manning doesn't start one and knock us down to number 15.
I'll try not to.
Okay, try not to. You can check out our website at taxpayer.com. And next week, join us again, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. Paige will be here manning the ship. I'm on assignment in Victoria. Paige, you got Todd coming on?
Yeah, I have Todd, our Prairie Director, and I got Christine, our Ontario Director. We're going to talk about this big carbon tax push that's happening across the country, and some particularly crazy stuff that's been happening in Ontario with the government's green schemes there.
It's spreading, and on behalf of British Columbians, I apologize for starting this nonsense.
Like a big green blob has started to spread.
I know. It's like a green wave coming to take you all away. And trust me, it's not going to do a single thing for climate change, and it certainly will do very little but plunder the good people of Canada. But there you go. So, next week, taxpayer.com/taxtalk. Tune in for that. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Okay, thanks, guys.